All right. So welcome everybody to Connect You, first podcast of the series and of the new year. Today we've got our co-founder, Carl Momon House. Carl, how we doing today?
Doing pretty good, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. We're super excited to kick this thing off. Of course, being our first episode of the series, felt it appropriate just to introduce what we're trying to accomplish here. Obviously, you and I, Carl, we go way back. um, going back to this concept of connect you, the why, the origins of where we come from, what momentum is all about, connect you. When you think of connect you, Carl, what comes to your forefront of your mind? What could people learn about momentum from this podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that is really what we're really trying to accomplish on a larger scale with momentum, and that's bringing people together. Training and sports is a great way to connect, to create communities, and this is really what we're about, and what this podcast is hopefully going to really highlight is, our community, what we're about, and how do we think, what does building momentum look like to us? I'm hoping that everybody that tunes in, over the next couple of months through the year we'll get a good sense of what we're about and what kind of community we're building over here.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome, man. When you think of connect you, what are some things that came to mind when we were talking about how to name this thing and where we wanted this thing to go?
Yeah, we had a really good talk about ConnectU, huh? Really, I mean, I think some of the key things we talked about that really kind of, I think, motivate or capture what we're trying to do here is the spirit of connecting and bringing people together. And then, uh, the ability to create a space where people can learn when they come together. So that's really what it's about. It's about connecting our community or connecting people to our community, our momentum community, and creating a space where people can come as they are, and hopefully learn and grow within the fitness and health space. So that's what it's about. It's about creating that space and a platform for those two things to happen.
Right. And I remember, having that conversation with you and we were deciding like, hey, where do we want this thing to go? What is the master vision behind creating a podcast and what would be an appropriate name for something like this? This idea of connect you coming from, a university. Everybody goes to university with the same goal in mind, regardless of what degree you're trying to get out of it. You go there because you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of people who think, behave, and move in a way that is different than yours. And ultimately, you have the opportunity to be elevated by it, be elevated by a common tide that you surround yourself in. And so, we want to get to a place where, this podcast, this company allows people to do exactly that, be able to come in and have a safe space where people can grow, where people can invest into their careers, they can invest into their knowledge. Everyone knows, man, the Twitter game is the wild, wild west, man. It's not always a comfortable place to be. A lot of people out there really just trying to one up one another, really just trying to continue to show what they know, but it's not always a place where people can safely grow, where people can safely get into a space where they're being impacted in a positive way by one another. So obviously, as a first time interview, we're excited to have you here and talk about the vision of this thing. But we're really excited about the people who are going to continue to populate this podcast as we go forward. So, speaking on Sidekick, let's talk about it. What the heck is Sidekick and what is it that it has to offer?
Yeah, so Sidekick is an online training platform for trainers and their athletes, empowering them to connect and train online regardless of where they are. So Sidekick is really a tool built for performance coaches with the support of performance coaches, allowing them to streamline their performance and online training workflows so that they're able to effectively assess, train, and monitor athletes regardless of where they are.
Hmm. Okay. So, what would you say, coming from the vision of this thing, right? You talk about like, why was this thing initially created? There's so many things out there in the fitness industry now. There's so many tools. Why come up with something like Sidekick?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because we understand that there's a lot of competition in the online fitness space and that there's some options out there. But one of the biggest things we really came to when we first started this was creating really like how you said it at the beginning, right? It's about that space, it's about that community. So although there are tools that exist out there, we didn't feel like, and the feedback we got was that there was a lot of tools that people could tell weren't built by the community and for the community. So we really tried to create, a tool that was focused, for the performance training landscape, and really give people the tools that allows them to be effective as what they do. So we're really not trying to be, everything for everyone. We're not trying to solve every, online training or online fitness problem that's out there. We're really focused on allowing performance training to occur, to the best of its ability online as if you were in person. So really, that's our focus, and our community is what really helps us be different within that space.
Yeah. And so, help people understand a little bit about where you come from and why this tool was created. What type of solutions does this tool provide for the problems that you might have faced in your own athletic journey?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Tyler, I mean, when I first came up here, I was doing a lot of back and forth in the off seasons between being in Alberta, being in Edmonton, where we were at, and then flying home for the summers and the holidays to be with my family. And one of the greatest things I think that, Sidekick provides is the ability to stay in touch with with the training you need. As a young athlete, especially in those first couple of years, getting that extra support and staying connected, to the school and to the program would have probably done wonders for me. I definitely struggled in my first couple of years, kind of making that transition to becoming a collegiate athlete. And any type of support or mentorship you can continue to get, can only be of help, right? So that's the things that I think Sidekick really does, is it's keeping, coaches connected to their athletes. It keeps their athletes connected to their coaches, allowing you to continuously grow. And so I think that's the biggest thing. I also think that, honestly, even though I'm not an athlete anymore, one of the biggest problems I think I see, and really fuels me today, is on the trainer side. I mean, right now, I used to coach, I coached high school ball. I still kind of am involved in a lot of high school football. And, a lot of, the athletes that we have in the community we're coaching in right now, just outside of Calgary, there's a lot of things that, our kids don't have access to because they're not in the city, right? There's not that many, gyms out there. And even if they are, it's not like, the best trainers are really there per se, right? And that's not meaning to disrespect anyone or anyone that's running their businesses out there, but that's just to say that there's a whole lot of demand and not as much supply, or not as much of a diversity of that supply. So Sidekick is a way to also ultimately enable, um, those with the knowledge, trainers and coaches, to kind of spread their expertise to the communities that might have a large need for it. I mean, I would ask you that, right? Like, I would ask you, as being part of Sidekick and being part of Momentum, sorry, I should say, um, within your coaching experience, how have you seen some of the athletes you've trained, get resource constrained, right? Like, or what are some of the things you've seen that really helps differentiate between, uh, athletes who reach their goals and succeed and athletes who don't?
That's a good question. And I think, looking at the differences between, as a guy who's now lived and been a part of athletics from Canada and the US, I get this question all the time, right? People ask me, man, what is the difference between the guys in the US and the guys in Canada? And one of the things that, I've become increasingly aware of is a lot of guys who come from the US are familiar with competition. And that sounds like a crazy response, but really what it means is just simply that the level of competition that you're surrounded by on a constant basis is ultimately what's going to give you the base or the threshold for what greatness is, for what competitiveness is, for what it takes to win, right? And I think a lot of guys who come from the US, being surrounded by so many more people overall in general, but also I think the standards of athletics being a little bit higher as well. And when you're consistently surrounded by people who have a high standard, and there's so many more of them who are achieving and have those high standards, it's one or two things that's going to happen, right? It's a sink or swim. It's really simple. You either rise to the tide or you fall behind. And I think a lot of times when you compare Canada to the US in athletics, I think that's one thing that you could really pinpoint as a key difference, because it's great athletes everywhere you go. But the difference is are you consistently subjected to the type of things that are going to get the best out of you? That's the question. So let's take that, to the sidekick profile, right? Like, why does sidekick matter, and why are these things important? Well, it's simple, because when you can be in as you said, an ecosystem that supports your development as an athlete, that's an advantage. That's a huge advantage. So not only does it matter where you come from, how you were brought up, but man, it matters what you continue to be surrounded in. Hence ConnectU, man. Like, hence the whole concept of, like, are you surrounded by things that elevate you? Are you surrounded by things that rise the tide? And so again, like, to me, watching the guys that I've coached over the years, I think that's one of the biggest differences you see, especially in high school athletes on the come up, man. What have you been surrounded by? And what kind of competitive culture have you been around most of your life? Guys who go to the pros, guys who flourish in college. I think one thing that you can pinpoint as a major difference is really that key competitive trait. Like, are you truly willing to go through the process to get where you want to go? Are you competitive enough to do that? And I don't think that stuff happens by accident. Truly, I think that you have to foster those things. So whether it's because you were fortunate to grow up in a city full of great athletes that have history and rich tradition, or you have to go through a platform like Sidekick to have an opportunity to be surrounded by coaches who pull the best out of you because you live in a small town and don't have the same opportunities as maybe some other people do. Regardless of whatever those things are that get you there, I think it's extremely important, and truly is the thing I think that separates great athletes from average ones.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Because it just goes back to, how do you almost foster greatness, right? Like, how do you put together an environment where people can thrive? And I know that's something that we all face in a lot of different ways, but something that I always think gets belittled a lot when it comes to athletics, right? And I know right now we're talking a lot about what inspired us to build momentum and Sidekick and the vision behind it. And I'd say that's another thing, right? Is athletics in general do a lot for our communities and do a lot for young men and young women all over the world. And I think that when I start seeing what's happening to some programs through lack of funding and things of that nature, it really continues to motivate myself. And I know we've all had talks about it within our greater team, but it just continues to make this feel much more important, right? Because I just think that's a space, that gets belittled quite a lot. Depending on who you talk to and their level of understanding, um, as to how the greater athletic community really functions. So, yeah, I love that you brought that up.